So when the rest of the committee and myself were starting to brainstorm ideas for this symposium, we hoped to try to put together a pretty diverse lineup of speakers. We wanted to hear from folks that were working in the hard science, working in industry and business, working in policy making and governance, but we also wanted to provide a platform for the very root of the system and the men and women that work really hard, probably one of the most tough and underappreciated jobs in the world, and that's the people that actually produce our food and try to connect us to that food system. So we put together this panel to end off the day, and we're hoping to get some unique perspectives from 3 very different operations on the ideas that we've heard today, and also any questions that you might have. So on our panel today, we have Woody Van Arkel, we have Bill Shank, and we have Adrienne Lickers, who, as I said, are each involved in a pretty unique agricultural operation. We're going to have them each take about 5 minutes to introduce themselves and what they do. And then I'll have a couple of questions to sort of start us off, and then we'll open up the floor. Valerie will come around with a microphone for any questions that you might have, or again, if you're on the webinar, you can put questions into the chat and we'll get those answered. So Woody, if you'd like to start.
I'm going to stand up. I feel strange talking about myself sitting. So I'm Laurent Van Arkel, otherwise known as Woody by most people in this world. I farm, I'm second generation farmer outside of Dresden, Ontario, which is just north of Chatham in the deep south, or almost the deep south. And I'm a primarily corn, soybeans, wheat. I also grow sugar beets for Michigan Sugar. And I have a small hog operation, finishing barn. And at one time grew processing tomatoes for Heinz until they closed their doors 4 years ago. I have a keen interest in soil health and soil sustainability. It's an idea where the light bulb went off, I guess, 30 some years ago, plowing for my dad and plowing up old corn stalks from the year before and not having a clue what was wrong, just knowing it wasn't right. And it started me on a journey that I'm still on today. I have boiled it down to 3 guidelines or goals that I like to screen my ideas or where I want to take my farm to. One is I want to have a soil covered at all times. So I don't want to see bare soil. And then again, these are goals I'm trying to achieve. They're not always, I don't always do it, but that's what I'm trying to work towards. So it's having the soil covered at all times, whether it's a living plant or a crop residue. I don't want to see bare soil. I don't want to lose my soil to water erosion or wind erosion. I don't want it impacted by sun and the impact of rain. Secondly, is I want to keep a diverse living root system 365 days a year in my soil. It's a bit of a challenge, but that's what I'm working to. I want to keep my soil biology active. I want it working. I want it cycling nutrients. I don't nearly think I understand the whole process. That's for you guys to figure out. But I know it's important. So I'm working on interseeding cover crops into standing corn. I'm trying to establish cover crops as soon as other crops are harvested. I'm also working on, and this is very preliminary, a perennial cover crop system where I just till 10 inches out of the 30 and have a perennial cover crop growing. And the last part of the last goal is to have as little tillage done to my land as possible. So right now I no-till wheat and soybeans and strip till corn and sugar beets. So it's still a little bit of tillage. There's a little bit of tillage after sugar beet harvest, mostly to level the field and incorporate a cover crop, but I'm trying to keep that all to a minimum. The other thing that's it's kind of a new little idea that is grown out of the last year or so, working with Ralph Martin back there in the corner, and Jocelyn's here, and Cameron back there, and is a research farmer collaborative effort where there's input from all sides and from different disciplines to try to utilize a research plot from a cost-effective point of view, I guess, so that I do a lot of the work if I don't screw it up, and I let the university go at it and pull the data that they want, and I get to see that. So it's I think it's a cost-effective way to utilize productive research so that is relative, very pertinent to what's going on the farm. So that's where I stand right now, and I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you very much, Woody. I'm Bill Shank. I'm from St. Catharines, and so for most of you in here, I'm not sure if you know where St. Catharines is, but if you've been to Niagara Falls, you've passed our operation. We're on the QEW and the 406 interchange as you head to Niagara Falls. I'm fourth generation on the farm, and so I'm a little surprised to be here today. When I got the invitation to come and speak, it was like, how was my name picked out of the blue? And I got the email from Jacqueline, and I said, so why me? Why would I be coming up here to speak? And so my time at the university was spent at daggy pubs or in the bars, not in the classroom. And to come back here, it's kind of a different type of feeling to come and speak to people about agriculture at this time. So thanks for the invitation. And so just a little bit about our operation. So being fourth generation on the farm, we were there before the QEW was there. So many of the challenges that have taken place with our operation, the farm was split in half, and so thus we're one of the only farms in Ontario that has its own private access underneath the highway. We're also the ones that took the government to court on salt damage and successfully defeated the Ontario government on the salt damage case on salt on peach trees, so one and the same company. So we've had experience dealing with the government on different issues, some that the government wasn't too happy about, and some that we've worked through. So working with the MTO on splitting up the highway, some of the different experiences that you would not normally experience coming from a farm, and so thus some of the challenges that we've had. The farm started back in about 18. The 8 1870. At that time, we were doing tomato tomatoes. And we were one of the first canning factories in the Niagara region canning tomatoes. Tomato sales were bad that year, and so my great grandfather set up a canning company and started canning tomatoes, and we still have some of the original labels back from the original canning factory. He moved on from there, and so to our present location, where we started with vegetables. We grew all sorts of all the different vegetables outside. We had hot houses where we do the starter plants. We expanded into greenhouses. And in the greenhouses, we used to have tomatoes, cucumbers, um, my grandfather had a great love for flower production. And so one of his favorite uh, types of flowers was the geraniums. And so we worked with geraniums and we ran into some issues with disease and geranium back in the late 60s and so my father worked with a gentleman and the US and they formed a company which they looked into culture indexing, virus indexing of geraniums and their company traveled around the world looking for new cultivars, new variety and working with Penn State and Cornell University on cleaning up some of the plants and so it's interesting today to hear people talk about the crosses and some of the stuff that was going on. And how I can relate that back to the geranium production that we do. We've expanded the greenhouse over the years. we now have 10 acres of greenhouse that we do all pot plant and cutting production in. We work very closely with different ministries on different trials and testings, just to work with to see how we can make a better product. And quality products are the only thing that sell these days. We also expanded as we keep changing. We were tender fruit at one time, and so anything from strawberries to sweet cherries, sour cherries, plums, pears, grapes, that we're now down to that we just grow grapes for wineries. And so last night at dinner we had some wine from Inniskillen and Jackson Triggs, which is the winery that takes my grapes. And so I was glad to see that. We're also, this year, like many of you and the other farmers, we're still harvesting, and the season's gone a little bit longer, and we are still out harvesting today. So for me not to be there during harvest was a little bit difficult for me, but I have the next generation, my son, who's there looking after things. So that's allowed us to continue the transition here. One of the other changes that we've made is that we're one of the larger areas for growing outdoor garden mums. And so currently we have over 25 acres of outdoor garden mum production. It takes us about 6 weeks to plant that out, and it takes less time to ship them in the fall. And so one of the benefits that we've had through the generations is the ability to change. And so we've been now put into a green belt, which is now going to make sure that the land stays in farming. The Niagara Peninsula is all green belted. And so thus the pressures of urban expansion have diminished with the green belt being in place. With the green belt, we also have some challenges and some opportunities. And so some of the other things that I do, I'm vice chair of the Grape Growers of Ontario. And so with that, sitting on the board, I get lots of opportunities to go speak with different levels of government and try and promote and the industry, not only growing grapes, but in the end product on the wine that takes place as well. Some of the challenges that we're experiencing, and we set up a committee back in February of this year. It's the Canadian Grapevine Certification Program. One of the problems that we have, it's been brought to light with some of the extreme conditions that we've been experiencing with the weather change, is that viruses become very prominent in some of the cultivars of grapes that we're growing. And this process has been in place for the last 6 years. We're finally able to pull together BC, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Quebec to form an entity to look at clean stock production for grapes. And so we're busy trying to put that program together, and we have meetings probably 3 times a month. And as you can imagine, with everyone across the country and everyone's busy schedules, it's been a bit of a challenge to try and do that. But we've made a lot of progress in a short period of time. One of the other committees that I sit on is through the Niagara region, as they have an ag committee, and part of that ag committee, I'm chair of the irrigation project. And so being in Niagara, we're surrounded by Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. We also have the Niagara River. We have the Welland Canal. but we have very limited access to water. And so some of the challenges that we have lying ahead, we just finished doing the survey of the growers in the area. We're working very closely, and so people say, so why can't you get water? Well, there's the Great Lakes Treaty, there's the environment, there's the conservation. And I think when we added it up, there was 9 different agencies that had some type of control over accessing water in our area. And so earlier today, we were talking about things that have changed. And so one of the things has changed. It was supposed to stay in agriculture, but the tools that we're given to work with are getting harder and harder to make it viable to be in agriculture. Thus some of the challenges. And so for farmers these days, and growers, it's very difficult to get out and speak and keep our voice in the forefront. And so you heard it's less than 2%. So the less than 2%, there are very few people that can afford to take the time away from the farms to go out and lobby and campaign for projects that we need to keep agriculture viable.
My name is actually Adrienne Xavier. I'm in the process of changing it, but sorry, guys. I am actually the manager of the Our Sustenance program, which is a food access and education program on Six Nations. Barry talked this morning a little bit about sort of the history of where we are and some of that fantastic clay that we grow things in. One of the things that we started out was the community asked for access to actual food. And I'm not saying like you need to know the name of the farmer. Though that's always great. Um, Local food, they were looking for things that they could actually get their hands on without having to leave the community. Because of all the socioeconomic issues that we face as a community. Um, so one of the things that we started was a community garden, which was very much a just here's some vegetables, whatever we planted, and whatever we plant to this day. Whatever we plant in the community garden, you are welcome to take as a community member. We don't ask, we don't look. We don't we hope for theft. Um, we also started a farmers market, and I was the only vendor at a table very much like this. With only things that I had picked from a local farmer. But telling a farmer that was 10 kilometers off the reserve that, hey, by the way, there's hunger in this community that's right next door to you, they were shocked. So that's always a really big impact to people when you find out, oh, hey, these people actually have an issue of accessing stuff that we, throw away or compost by the basketful. So they were willing to give me a discount if I would myself, except for the squash. They said I wasn't allowed. I was not sure about that, but I'm like, I won't pick your squash. I'm fine with that. I'm not complaining. So the first year was a lot of education in the community and a lot of people wanting to know whether or not I was going to come back. Stability in our community is a very big key issue. Anyone who's starting to something new is always going to be a push. People who are doing research, same thing. There's always those questions. Well, what do you want? What do you want from us? What are you going to do? So we expanded a little bit, and I say a little bit. I hired the next year. I was still a volunteer, and I was hired on in 2012 to actually be part of the program as opposed to just the person who was selling everything that I was picking. I made partnerships with a couple of farmers who were able to access things from other farms at a better price than I could. From there, we expanded again. We got a pilot project to start a greenhouse, which was already existing, and Guyana Say, which you saw a picture of this morning, their first greenhouse was actually the one that I have now. It's about 12,000 square feet, and I always tell people, oh, I have a little greenhouse, it's great. And then people get there and they're like, oh, it's 12,000, huge, what are you doing in here? And what we're doing in there is half of it is set up so that in the springtime we can actually grow seedlings for the community to purchase at a discount price. And I say discount, I don't know what that really means to us. It's an accessible price. On the other side of it, we actually have raised garden beds that we run workshops and education, and we operate a food access program out of. So it's twofold for us, 4x4 square raised beds of mixes of soil that come from our community. So we take that fantastic clay that is not so fantastic for growing anything, and we actually amend it so that it's usable. It's a process, I know. But from there, we grow food in the greenhouse 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can come in and purchase the most expensive bag that you've ever found. It's $3 for a grocery bag, but with that bag, you can put whatever you want in it that's in the greenhouse growing. So any day, anytime, anyone in our community can come and get food. We grow in the summertime this year. I think we had tomatoes, radishes. Kale is always a big thing, and it's like 6-7 feet tall in our greenhouse. It'll grow for 3 seasons till finally we get tired of it because the stalk is like this big around. We'll do different greens, Swiss chard, rainbow chard, 3 kinds of lettuce, usually 3 or 4 kinds of tomatoes. Because of the ability of the greenhouse to stay fairly consistent, and I always tell people it's a giant plastic building, of course it's going to be great in here. The tomatoes are always a little bit sweeter for us, just inside for whatever reason. But this year we also did a market garden outside because I had one staff member who came to me and she said, I want to be a farmer. I said, okay, sure, I love that. So what she did was she actually started last year. She made 12 by 12 raised beds that lasagna garden because she wants to test things out. And she was able to grow a few things last year. This year she had about 20 of those raised beds and was able to produce food for the community that was not just, hey, there's food in the community that we're able to get, but people are actually starting to ask the question of, okay, well, how is that grown? Is it from here? How far away did it come from? And those are the questions that we were hoping to eventually get to with the community. On our side of things, and on my side of things, I'm still the manager of a program. We're actually part of the Six Nations of the Grand River Development Corporation, which now is the arm's length operation of economic development. We are a for-profit model who operates like a nonprofit. So we actually are able to give back to our community what the profit is that we make after all of our programming costs. So my program is part of that. We also then, of course, offer the intrinsic value to the community of actual food on site. We have partnered with almost everyone, really. I'll tell people all the time, I go out and make friends with people. I go lots of places. I'm not afraid to ask people A, for money, or B, for time. And I'm not afraid to ask for information from people. Hey, do you know about stuff? What can you tell me about it? One of the greatest things about today for me was the fact that, like I said, one of my staff wants to be a farmer one day. Right now she's busy hatching a human. She's about a month away from giving birth. But she's already trying to plan for next summer. I'm like, you're gonna have a little tiny baby. She's like, but if I'm a farmer, that's never gonna go away. I said, that's true. You're very right. So she is always asking me, what can you find out? Who do you know that I could talk to that will give me more information? I'm like, well, I'm gonna go and I'm just gonna ask everyone that I see, what can you tell me about it? But at the same time, I also do the same thing because we offer access and education. So we teach gardening classes and sustainability. We have chickens and an herbal apothecary. We have a meditation garden that's 60 by 120 feet. And what we do is we create the door for people to come in to say, what could I do to actually do this myself? Because there's still, to this day, other than ours, isn't a farmer on the reserve that does something other than cash crops. Like, we don't have that person who has a market garden. We don't have someone who could bring things that are local. So until we get that, we're going to keep doing it ourselves, I guess. I'll just have to keep her as a farmer on staff. But that's us.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So I'm going to start off with one or two questions, and then we'll open it up. So each of you have talked about different challenges that you faced. So maybe if we could start by all of you, or each of you, not all of you at one time, listing one thing that you're really proud of that you've done really well in the past, and then one thing that you maybe wish you had done differently in the past and that you will do differently in the future.
So I'll start. So about 8 years ago, we had a very cold winter and we lost a lot of grapevines. And so I did a little tour of the vineyard and saw there was a bunch of vines that had come through and hadn't died. So I'd go along and see that there'd be 10 dead vines and there'd be one good vine. And so I started tracking that. And lo and behold, when it came through the summertime, some of those vines that came through had a full crop on. Some of those vines that came through didn't have a crop. And so for the last 8 years, I've been going through doing selection process and marking down and doing trial blocks out from the vines that cropped heavy. And so I've been able to take that and multiply that out. And so now I have one row with 104 vines of each one of the selections. And I started with 100 selections. And so some years through the nursery, the takes weren't that good. So it delayed the process for a little bit longer. And so now I was able to go through the selection process that I was using. I was able to go through and identify the vines that cropped heavier versus the vines that didn't crop. And so I've been able to weed it out. And so for my last planting that we just harvested for the first time last week, the differences with uniformity in crop load was significant compared to where we first started. And so the other part of the project that was interesting is the cold hardiness. And so in Niagara, we have a cold vine alert as well as vine testing for to see how cold the vines can take before the buds freeze. And so I'm very fortunate that one of the groups that does this as a company is located in our operation. They set up a satellite office and they work very closely with the University of Brock. And what we found is that through testing of these ones, that we were 1.5 to 2 degrees more cold hardy with the vine selections that I have. And you say 1.5, 2 degrees, that makes all the difference whether you have a crop or whether you don't have a crop. And so I feel that's been a very good success story. The people from the university are now looking at it. They're going to be doing some testing, and so as far as the wine quality, and we're going to do some genetic testing on those vines to see what the differences are, if there is any differences between the selections that I have. What are the one things that I wish I had done? I wish I would have started this when I was 20 years old rather than when I'm starting it now.
What I don't know if you'd call it a success, but what I really enjoy is having people come to my farm, having them walk through the fields with me and sit down on the back deck afterwards and talk about what they're doing, what we're doing. It's a sharing of information, and I've had a chance to meet people from around the world doing that. So it's been a very interesting two-way learning street that way. Same thing, I should have started doing this 20 years sooner.
I'm pretty sure I couldn't have started this 20 years sooner. I probably could have, but it wouldn't have been as interesting to me even then. I think for myself, one of the things that I've done that was the most impactful in our community was actually 2 summers ago, we put in traditional mound gardens in our community garden. Just to give people the idea of what the differences are in the kind of garden they can have. We teach about square foot gardening, we teach about companion planting, but traditional mound gardens are actually corn, beans, and squash, which is the Three Sisters or Our Sustenance, which is where our program name came from. And by planting our traditional white corn, climbing beans, and squash together, we were able to show the community that the output for squash was actually double as opposed to planting it on its own or in rows. Mostly just because if a person in our community wants to plant for food for themselves or to be able to see something and they're not really confident to say that they're a farmer or a gardener, it's a really easy way for them to be able to be successful without a whole bunch of work, because the combination of those 3 things, while being somewhat culturally contentious because people don't always agree where that knowledge came from, they feed each other so well, because the corn grows, the beans are using the corn to grow up, but the beans are then providing the nitrogen that the plants all need. And the squash, of course, provide that ground cover that protect everything, which means that people who are brand new gardeners don't necessarily need to weed a whole bunch or even water a whole bunch if they've got reasonable soil, which we teach them how to amend in our gardening classes. So it was one of the greatest things for us to be able to say to people, you know, go check out the community garden, tell us what the differences are that you see, and for people to come back and say, well, those 6 mounds yielded like 70 squash and I only saw about 30 out in the field. I'm probably just going to do that next year. It's just that one more way for us to be able to do something to show people options for themselves and to be successful. I think something that I wouldn't have done, or I'm not real impressed about. Well, no, pretty much every day I learn something new, and I have to be really proud of the fact that our community is willing to take it, and they participate and tag along with all of the shenanigans that my mom and I get into.
So thank you for that. So I'm just gonna give one more question and then we'll open up the floor. So in the next 10, 20, 30 years, I'm sure each of you will have a different perspective on from your specific operations or businesses, but also the business and the industry of growing food as a whole. So what do you think priorities should be for the years to come, and what's the biggest challenge facing that priority?
Okay, well, I'll start. On a grand scale of priorities, I always think that growing food is a priority. I just understanding the ways to be able to do that in a bigger way. For myself and in our community, one of the things that I'd love to see is actually a farm partnership where youth can learn how to farm, whether it's on a test plot on our property or something like that, working with either the university or someone who's a farmer in the community and being able to learn what that means. Because like I said, if I hadn't had someone come to me and say, I want to be a farmer, I would never have picked her in a crowd to say she wants to be a farmer. You wouldn't know. But there are lots of people in the community who are interested in those things. So over the next 10, 20, however many years it takes, I want to be able to see ways that we can make our community sustainable. And that's one of them. I think that's the key. And aside from that, in and around Southern Ontario, like I said, I can't urge enough that growing food is part of that, because I see a lot of crops being grown that they're not edible. They're not part of our food system. And some of that is just me and the research that I'm doing in food security, but good and truly, every part of what we do, it is vital to all of us. So that's one of the biggest things that I see happening.
I guess one of the challenges going forward when you talk about 20, 30 years, I don't think 20, 30 years from now